So, welcome back to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So, this is episode 148, which is a really great group chat that we just had with Jack Greco, who was previously the co founder at ACV Auctions. So, ACV Auctions is the leading wholesale automotive marketplace, which scaled to an IPO in 2021. So, Jack is also an active marketplace investor, having previously invested in over 200 startups as an angel, and is now investing in them through an early stage venture fund he started which focuses on investing in B2B marketplaces. So this is a really great chat with Jack, where we got to learn more about his journey starting and scaling ACV auctions, what some of his key learnings and lessons were now looking back, how he's now investing in B2B marketplaces, what he looks for in B2B marketplaces more specifically when investing in them. Jack shared some tips for early stage founders. We also had a great group Q&A. So really enjoyed this conversation, and you're going to find it a great watch to the end. So, Jack, welcome to the group chat. And you have some really awesome B2B marketplace operator now investor experience. So, I'm really excited to have you join us here today and dive into things with you. Before we do, though, I think it might be great if you can start off by sharing a little bit more on your background, though, for those that don't know you. Then, what led you to B2B marketplaces more specifically?
Cool. Well, first of all, thanks a lot. I love doing this. I've been in the venture community since I graduated college, even before that in entrepreneurial stuff. But really, I learned what venture was when I was going to grad school. And I kind of touched every part of it, both as an associate on a fund, really kind of a management consultant that got dropped into different companies, a founder with ACV amongst a couple other groups, an angel, and now kind of being more on the institutional investment side. So I know kind of what each of the chairs feels like around the table, and I'm happy to talk from the collective point of view or any of them individually. I grew up the son of an entrepreneur, and I do think there's a genetic aspect to it. So I'm really excited to be here. My background, I mean, ACV is a car company. I'm not in it because I'm a car guy. I was in it because I really enjoyed marketplaces. My dad was an antique dealer. I spent a lot of time around auctions, which I always thought were kind of the ultimate version of a marketplace with the right type of urgency mechanisms on it. So I'm really a platform individual. But happy to talk about absolutely anything you guys want. I come off pretty unfiltered and, happy to help.
Yeah, no, that's a really great background. So thanks for sharing with us, and so much we're going to get into here. But I guess marketplaces is somewhat specific, and then even more so B2B marketplaces, right? So what initially kind of attracted you to B2B marketplaces, and I guess why do you think they make great businesses?
I'll be honest, even though I'd spent a lot of time when I was younger in retail, the way retail or B2C is today, I don't understand. I'm not a child of social media. And I think B2B was it just made sense. It was heavily relationship based versus, I can't tell you the first thing about return on ad spend and how to do digital marketing. And it's funny when we talk about ACV, you hear how little of those things actually happen. But I always thought of B2B is just relationship based, marketplaces where you had to find a way to have people both trust this non-human entity, this business, in the case of ACV, ACV itself, but still be able to increase this user experience because humans want to deal with humans. Humans trust humans. Everybody knows that people built systems. And so I thought it was a really interesting way to do that. I think a marketplace is the most defensible type of business model. Sure. I mean, I had spent some time in my 20s in deep tech, but I would say the most naturally defensible business model because I truly think, I used to tell people ACV wasn't a business of cars. It was a business of people and dealing with relationships. And you could just see if you go on LinkedIn and you Google all the different job names that potentially fall under customer service, whether that's sales or customer success or operations, it's really just a human business. And I'm really interested. I mean, again, like I also represent a founder in the generation right before really the dawn of AI. So I don't know if, now looking at marketplaces, I still am also a child of the game too, trying to understand how are things changing now that it's, not how do you recruit the best person to be able to give the best customer experience, but there are more options than just finding the best person on the other side of the phone or the keyboard. So, I've always loved them. And I think life is short, and I think it's great to be able to get into the niches and nuances of these different industries. I really think that marketplaces have the ability to absorb, the best ones absorb and take advantage of the unique characteristics of the industries that they're in. So I just think they're cool.
Yeah, those are some really good points, and you got a lot of head nods here, so certainly relatable with us all. So, so I guess going back to the very beginning though, with ACV auctions. So, what was the founding story for it? Maybe what were some of those kind of first steps that you took to start it as a B2B marketplace?
Yeah. I'm 40 now, and I was 30 at the time that ACV came into my life. So it's really been the last decade. At the time, there were three of us that were co-founders. Dan, my CTO, ran an incubator at the time. I was running around under the veil of some made up entity that just allowed me to kind of function as a management consultant in startups. And so the two of us, I was in Rochester, Dan was in Buffalo. We were friends. We were two of the youngest guys on the tech scene at that time. Buffalo and Rochester had very nascent, non-deep tech startup ecosystems, right? Like, what had happened on, in terms of like deeper tech and chemistry and biology and stuff like that. That was its own world. But in terms of just software tech, it was really early. And in one day walked this guy who had just moved back to Buffalo. His wife was from there. And he said, "Hey, I need someone to build me a company." And he met Dan, and he thought an incubator was the kind of place you just went and paid somebody and they built stuff for you. And that third guy was Joe. And Joe was a used car dealer. And Joe said, "I think there's a better way to do this. I've been taking advantage of this arbitrage play of taking online, the offline world and bringing it online, taking advantage of eBay Motors and stuff like that to sell stuff. I think we could build a full platform." Dan knew how to build things, and Dan knew, he knew me, and he knew that there needed to be somebody to run kind of like operations and finance that understood auctions from a different point of view. And the three of us came together. It was the same week that I found out I was having a kid. A couple of days later, we kind of all had decided in November of 2014 that we were going to do ACV auctions. So, one miracle begot another, maybe. And then, over the next 6 months, 7 months, we had built and launched the company. We sold our first car in June of 2015. So it was a little while ago. It was obviously a lot of the story has been chronicled in different ways. But really, I think that the company ended up making it because we weren't revolutionary. This is a very evolutionary thing. Had we tried to do it 3 years earlier, 4 years earlier, I don't think it would have worked. Those first 15, 16, 17, it was, people saying they didn't know their Apple password to even download the app and use it. It was just at that point when people just really started to get more and more comfortable with using the phone. These weren't, the thing was, people were always like, people will buy a $20,000 car over the phone. And I go, these guys don't think about it like a $20,000 car. I'm not saying it's as carefree as Amazon, just press a button and if I don't like it, I return it. They understand the inherent risks with it. But I think it was the first time that we were also, I think marketplaces are a lot of being able to make things better than what exists, not just because you can buy it with a click of a button. ACV, I truly believe, worked not because you could buy stuff with your phone. That's what made it easier to work. It happened because we were the first one to really outline what the product was, what the used car was. So the fact we did such deep, and we did it ourselves. ACV probably has close to 1,000, if not more, conditional inspectors today. But we had one of our employees, a W-2 employee, going and looking at every single car and saying, "We represent what this is." And I think it was that started to build the trust in the system that allowed people to want to use it more and more. Because they weren't just getting a car, they were getting a car with somebody's guarantee underneath it that represented some type of certainty that de-risked it, right? And the best marketplaces, I think, de-risk the transaction.
No, that's a really, really good point as far as about, building trust and, the kind of guarantee on one side. So I guess for a little bit of context, though, could you kind of give us maybe like an overview of ACV auctions as a marketplace before we jump into some of the more specific topics?
Look, it's B2B. but it's not entirely different than if anybody goes on eBay while they're on this call and looks up a car, right? There'll be, it's digitized what at the time was a primarily physical auction. Depending on how you count, somewhere between 10 and 20 million cars a year changed hands from dealers to other dealers, in a physical way at the time that we started. The numbers probably was 16 or 17 million. Half of that being where the car was sourced from a rental fleet or a leasing company. And the other half of it were made up of the cars that got traded into dealers that they didn't want to retail, right? I'm a Ford dealer and you just trade in a Silverado. Well, guess what? The last thing I'm doing is putting that on my lot next to my F-150. Dealers care a lot about brand loyalty and brand continuity. So because of that, there's this, 15 to 20 million cars a year that kind of were moving around. And ACV is it's a mobile first platform that allows for you to bid on and purchase cars you can use the computer too, but right over the phone if you're a business. 17,000 franchise dealers, those are people that have a Chevy or Ford, emblem over their store. And then 100,000 plus independent dealers. That's Jack Greco's Auto Barn down on the corner. And so highly fragmented on both sides, and we started the company in Buffalo, New York, home of the future Super Bowl champs of 2024. We took very much an adjacent market growth hypothesis, where we kind of grew out from there. Car's a real regional thing. Like if you're in Seattle, you don't need to go all the way to North Carolina to buy a Toyota Corolla. You fly over, 3 million of them in between. So we kind of grew. So there was a regional approach to this, but the whole thing was digital. And we, I think, did a really good job of decoupling the transaction. It wasn't buyer and seller. It was buyer had a relationship with ACV and the seller had a relationship with ACV. So we tried to own every part of that experience so that we could optimize every part of that experience. Payments, the moving of paperwork and titles. If there was an issue, we call it arbitration. We help arrange financing and transportation. That all happened with us. And if there was a problem, outside of having a magic wand to make the car that somebody thought they bought appear, which we couldn't do, everything short of that we did to try and keep people happy. It's funny. The overwhelming majority of what normally would be in a marketing budget, because we did almost no marketing whatsoever, we put almost entirely back into what I call goodwill or make good. So we were trying to say, look, we want you as a customer for life. We understand that we're going to screw a lot of things up. We understand you're probably going to screw some things up. We're going to try and put as much of the value as we can back into this. So even if it takes years for you to ultimately become positive, for us to create more value than what it's cost us, we'll have you forever. And I think it's one of the reasons people are so committed to the platform. So I can't tell you how many dealers are on it right now. I've been out of it for a handful of years now, but it's a lot. They're probably doing somewhere between 7 and 800,000 units that they've transacted. Figure about double that's what's run across the system. So, and I think it's primarily dealer consignment. So it's probably about 20%, 15 to 20% of dealer consigned units in the US are running across ACV. And that's from selling our first car in 2015. So that's a little less than 9 years of growth, which, 20% market touch is pretty high. That's good reason why it's worth what it's worth today.
Yeah, no, it's certainly pretty incredible to see the sense of scale, and not only that, but relative market penetration there. So I guess as marketplaces, you typically kind of solve for one of the hard side, right? So what was that kind of hard side for ACV Auctions?
I gotta say, I think that the team we put around it, I give a lot of credit to Joe on this because he was the industry guy. In the beginning, the hard parts are the things that I think we did really good, right? Demand generation is important. And trying to create an event when there's nothing there for a while and build anticipation for something that doesn't exist yet is big. So, look, when we launched, people were ready. They were ready. We had it had almost been there had been this priming of the pump of people kind of getting ready for it. I think we did a nice job of generating an event where it was like, all right, June 1st, I remember the product was barely ready. And we were like, June 1st, we're running cars. No matter what, there's going to be cars on the system. And we had, gone to every dealer because it was primarily between dealers in Buffalo at that point. We had got them so mad at what they were currently using. Like I remember all of us were spending time talking to dealers being like, how was the auction this week? Knowing that it didn't go well. Oh, it's not awful. I was like, well, 2 more weeks you won't have to do. And so I would have thought the really hard part was getting demand on there because the supply side, we were going to dealers saying, we're going to make this as easy as possible. Take a picture of your car, put it on the system. It wasn't very long before we were the ones taking pictures, but we were really helping them a lot. So we could kind of create we were creating digital twins of what already resided on their lot. And these guys' job was to get numbers on the cars, numbers that people would pay for the cars. So we were like, hey, let us come and we'll give you a bunch of numbers on all your cars. So the demand side was the side I was most concerned about. Because we started so regionally, we almost didn't need to know, payments wasn't an issue. It was like, oh, someone hasn't paid us. We'd drive to their place and be like, you owe us for 3 cars. There were times when we would send 2 people out to actually drive a car from one place to another because they hadn't moved yet, right? When everything's really close, it makes it really easy. And then as it got bigger, that's when we started, we gave ourselves time in the womb before we went into the real world. And so, I'd seen so many other people. One of our biggest competitors was out of Toronto. It was a company called TradeRev. And US and Toronto, there's a ton of laws around moving cars across borders. So they kind of stayed north and we stayed south. But when they came to the US, I saw them come to so many different disparate locations. They were like in Washington, but then they were in Florida, and then they were in, Cleveland. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense. And I saw the pains that they had because they started so stretched out. So I actually think most of the problems that we would have faced were the fact that got mitigated by the fact we did this in sleepy little Buffalo, New York, where the auction there sucked. And we just kind of said, we're gonna dig our way out of whatever hole we get in. But the demand side, I would definitely say, I always tell people marketplaces are like grocery stores. If I walk in a grocery store that's massive, or at least believed to be massive, and there's only one thing on every shelf, I walk out. It doesn't matter if everything on every shelf is what I need, I walk out. So we always try to make things seem very small, very tight. We wanted there to be a small opening and then seem grand once we actually had the ability to fill the thing out. So, using that grocery store analogy, it'd be like if you just hung sheets and only showed people 5% of it, but the shelves were packed. So we really tried to create events around things. And so I think we ended up alleviating that biggest concern. And then, like anything, growth is tough because, we have heavy seasonality in our business. We sold 53 cars our first month, and then grew by 50 cars a month over month. So by month 4, we were doing 200 cars, right? So at $10,000 a car, that's a $24 million GMV run rate in month 4. Pretty impressive for a marketplace, right? Doesn't matter, our take rate was like 2 or 2.5%. And then all of a sudden we started to hit the lull that comes with like late fall, early winter, and things slowed down. And I would say one of our biggest thing was not keeping the momentum up, especially in those early days when things haven't clicked yet, and trying to make sure that things kept seeming up, because it was all about, these were all new people that really trusted us. Hardly anybody in our team had ever come from a startup. We were pulling them from really traditional businesses. And it was keeping that momentum that got them so excited so there wasn't a letdown or a crash, because it's tough, and that happened several times in our first couple of years before we really had product market fit.
Yeah. So you mentioned as far as some of the specific challenges, with the business, such as seasonality, right? But were there any others that kind of come to mind with it, specifically as a B2B marketplace?
I mean, we had positive working capital days, right? So our average ticket was 10 grand. You would think, okay, well, what would happen? And there were times when people didn't pay us. And so we'd be on the hook. Like a 2% take rate means I have to do 50 things right to make up one thing wrong, right? Like that's kind of how it works. And that's part of the problem with the really low take. So there were times when those issues happened, but I think we did a good job of putting mitigation plans in place, pretty early. The marketplace, it's, I think in Buffalo, we have really thick skin. Like people said no a lot in the beginning. No, I don't want to do this. No, I don't want to buy a car when I don't know who I'm buying it from. No, I don't trust you. And we just said, okay, well, what does it take? Do we have to give you money? All right, here, I'll come to your lot. When a car sells, I'll literally write you a check and I'll walk with you to the bank and we can cash it. Right. So we got a lot of pushback on stuff like that. It was getting people to trust in a high ticket environment in a city that wasn't that tech enabled to be able to be doing something like this. But I think one thing that we did was instead of making it all about the marketplace, we made it all about them making money, and the marketplace was just one of the tools in our toolbox. So we actually made the marketplace the cart, not the horse. And I don't see that as much now. It's like people go, this is the marketplace that we have, right? Like it's the center of our universe. And it's really like, no, the center of your universe is these guys all, Dee and Joe and I had all grown up in households with family, our fathers that all ran small business. And it was appreciating the fact that what we were doing was we were a revenue engine or an inventory engine for small business. But honestly, I mean, this sounds ridiculous. And, if anybody from like Bessemer is on the call, they'd probably laugh. But like, we didn't think we were that capital efficient and we didn't think it was that hard, but we ended up being very capital efficient. They used to love how capital efficient we were. And I mean, I don't know if we missed our numbers 1 month. Once we started having numbers after the first year, I don't think we missed them 1 month the entire time I was there. It was an amazingly linear business. We did not assume there was going to be economies of scale, and there wasn't economies of scale. Matter of fact, it got harder when we got bigger. It did not get easier. And I think we made these assumptions like, this is like every day this entire thing is going to fall apart. And if it doesn't, we just pray to God every night and thank him. But it wasn't that bad. I mean, I think I don't give us enough credit on how quick we had product market fit. We very well could have had it on day one, if that really is a thing. I will say that it's a very simple business in as long as you're honest, right? And our biggest thing was, how do we be as honest as possible? And that cost us a lot of sellers. They were like, well, why did you say this and this and this about this car? And it was, well, because I don't work for you. I work for the market, right? I work for this entity in this organization. So we ended up cutting a lot of sellers, which was tough, And look, I mean, ACV is not the greatest. There's a reason why it is one of the few B2B marketplaces that went public. Massive market, big ticket, kind of in a place where for how big automotive is at the time, there hadn't been a lot of innovation on the remarketing side, on the wholesale side. It was very evolutionary, not revolutionary. I mean, I can show you pages and pages of companies that could kill ACV that, I had dreamt up, and just nobody ever made one of them. And we just got lucky. We were the apex predator by default, is maybe a good way to put it. So
those are some really, really great examples. And also too, I would say on the extreme of, doing the manual and kind of things that don't scale, right? So you also have some really great investing experience now, which we're going to get into. But were there any specific kind of key learnings, maybe from your operator experience, that you've taken with you to now investing?
I will tell you this. When I was an operator, I did a horrible job. Not a horrible. I could have done a much better job of delegating and building the next level of leadership underneath me better. And so that's one of the things, like anything, right? The mistake you make is, the mark you carry with you, and you look for that more and more. So, it's funny. I, even when I talk to funds and stuff about valuation policy, I was like, you shouldn't even write these up until, there's a liquid value to it, right? Like these are all worthless. Because what people start to do is they start to say, oh my God, look at these markups between, pre-seed and seed and A, even A and B. And I go, yeah, but like, are they building in-house? We took pride in how much of our management was homegrown in-house with an internal farm system. And so I think that's one of the biggest things I carry with me. Like, are the leaders of the company, and they might not be the founders, because founders move, they just happen to be there on day one, right? And a lot of them are very important, but they don't end up always staying at the top. Are they doing a great job of building out the right type of organizational structure long term? And are they doing the things that it takes a long time to give a leader experience? And if you don't put the time in when you're short on it, it gets very expensive and very hard to import that, right? So I care a lot about, I tell people, assume you're growing your business like you're growing in Buffalo. No one wants to move there. It's cold as hell, right? Like, so how are we going to take the people we have here and be able to understand, discover what they're really amazing at and build them up to whatever is the proper place inside the organization for them? And so that's one of the things I think I accentuate. That's not just a marketplace thing. The other thing is, I'd say specifically to marketplaces, I need to understand that they look in supply and demand, or if it's a three-sided marketplace, A, B, and C, however you want to look at it, in a way where they really got champions inside each one of those. And it ends up being an in-house communication. One of the biggest lumber companies in the world happens to be in Buffalo. And I've gotten close with them. It's a group called Bailey Lumber, very traditional business, wonderful guys, wonderful for the community. And as I got to know them, it was really interesting. This is at the same time we were doing ACV. I got to see how internally the employees, because they ran a brokerage, they also had a marketplace, kind of were champions for whatever they were in. And so I really want to be able to understand, has the company built a healthy culture that allows supply and demand to have a champion within them and really work on behalf of their, on behalf of the fiefdom that they're in, right? And with marketplaces, I want them being super simple, and I want them super tight, narrow, deep wedges. Too many times I see people saying we could do A, B, and C, and I don't care. I said we could have taken ACV and sold cattle on it. We could have sold anything on it, and we did it. The entire time I was there, we would not even let independent dealers sell on the system. That's how narrow we stayed. So I look for these like super narrow, deep wedges. And it doesn't even need to be the biggest market in the world. I know we'll grow and expand out of that, but that's kind of the way I think of it. Those are the things that I look for. That kind of came from, because if we had gotten distracted at all at ACV, we would have been dead.
Yeah, no, that's going to be super helpful. So I was doing a little bit of research here prior to the chat and saw that you've invested in what I believe over 100 companies as an angel, and now investing, through venture early stage. So could you kind of give us like a quick kind of overview though of investing?
Yeah. So I am when I left ACV, I don't know. I don't think I thought the money was dirty, but I was like, okay, I'm 35. I don't need to work. If I don't need to work, I'm going to get like dumb, fat, and lazy. So I don't want to do that. So I kind of made this pledge to cycle everything back through venture. So I didn't have really a rhyme or reason. I cut checks at $1 million. I cut checks at 10 grand. But I gave myself 3 years. I ended up doing about 250 different investments. It's a mix of a lot of direct investments, over 100. I don't even know what it's at, maybe 150. And then I'm in another 60 or 70 funds as an LP. And then I did a bunch of just like squirrely Jack projects, right? I'm building a farm in the inner city in Buffalo, right near where that shooting was about a year ago, a little more than a year ago. Did a bunch of like, I try and combine like things I care about. I care a lot about conservation. I care a lot about, historic architecture. So I'm like, okay, if I can make all this stuff kind of like work together, I took a lot of shots on it. What did I learn? I learned that I'm a very emotional investor. I fall in love with people, fall in love with founders. And then when I do, it's just like, okay, what could I do? I also have learned I'm not Atlas. I cannot hold the world up. And I also realized that venture investing is almost completely luck. It really is. My portfolio's up on a piece of paper. I've had, I think, almost 9 or 10 exits, something like that. I got one more that's like pending right now. I've only had 7 companies die. And I was doing some angel investing when we were at ACV, when I was still at ACV, but it really started in 2019. So, and I was mostly pre-seed and seed. So it should be stuff that's dead, right? Like, if you make it 4 years and you've raised an up round and the company's growing, like that's what I count as alive. So, and the biggest thing I've realized is 100% around the people, especially early stage. I think as the organization gets bigger, it's less about it because, it's why I'm not an A and a B investor because, it becomes, when the valuation is basically zero, you just got to grow it. And then you start getting into the place of like, how do you value these things, right? It makes it really tough. I've realized I'm an LP in, I think, 60 funds, 60 firms, and then like, I don't know, maybe 70 funds across those. I realized most firms love you in the beginning when they're trying to raise money from you. Oh my God, you're blah, 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 blah. And then a lot of them you don't hear from again. So that's why a lot of them I'm in only one time. And I do think emerging managers work a lot harder. I know it's tough because they don't have the name brand, the notoriety, but the overwhelming majority of the funds I'm in are emerging managers. And I don't know how they'll do financially, but I can tell you a lot of those people have become friends for life. And I'm not a huge check. I'm not an anchor check in any of these. And the thesis-driven ones that are former operators are the ones that do the best. So
Really cool to hear, and definitely quite the portfolio you built up there. You've of course seen lots of founders and pitches, and B2B marketplaces too. That, as you mentioned, that you're specifically focused on. So what do you think are some of the maybe would you say kind of like traits or kind of characteristics of what kind of differentiate some of the just like the good kind of founders in B2B marketplaces versus the great?
So I like to know somebody that's got. So I won't invest in a company unless there is a founder that's got industry experience to the point of living the pain, right? So I'm not the guy that goes in onto the company that's got 3 former Bain consultants who haven't really been around something, Like they have to have gone into it. They need to have like adopted that pain, right? If the entity is an organism, that organism needs to have scars from it. I'm not super worried about market size. Like it can't be the smallest thing in the whole world, right? It can't, but I need to be able to know that what they're building, like that there is a strong thematic aspect to where they're going. Let's say it's, for me, the way to get me is to tell me there's a lot of waste in the world and we're creating value in that. Boom, I'm interested. I don't care what comes after it. That's one of the things thematically I care about, right? I'm one of the guys that thought Thanos wasn't that bad of a guy in Marvel. Maybe his idea wasn't horrible, that we have too many humans. So we need to find a way to like operate more efficiently. So I like people that there is a thematic aspect because I ultimately think like most companies, it's a coin flip's not a good example because that's a 50-50 probability, but think of it like a Dungeon and Dragon 20-sided die. Every time you roll it, if it's 18 or better, you have a good day. And if it's 17 or less, you have a bad day. And you got to have somebody that's willing to continue to roll the die, even though the odds are against them in the beginning. And the 20-sided die becomes a 10-sided die, becomes a 5-sided die. And then that's kind of where it stays, right? But, I want to know that there is no other option but success, and I like niche-y things. I do, because I think niche-y things can expand deeper and deeper. A huge fan of tier 2, ecosystems and stuff like that. I think I've invested across 70-ish different, what I think are ecosystems and regions. A lot of what I did since I left ACV is ecosystem development. And from that, I've angel invested, and from that, I've helped people, and I've done all this other stuff. But it was really because I cared about the community and the startup ecosystems. So I track the ecosystems that I'm in. When it comes to marketplaces, I want to know the viral nature of them, right? Like I really want to know how this is a contagion that kind of moves around. And I'm not saying that buyers need to all be buddy buddies with other buyers, but like that's what really makes these go, you know? So if there's a company where I love when the same person could be a buyer or a seller, because then all of a sudden there is no reason for them not to become a salesperson for you. I think your best salespeople are your customers. I primarily only do physical good marketplaces. I should subsegment that. And I want to know, like being able to know the pain of it. People that have I wouldn't say they have to be unique, but that logistics are not an issue. I think physical good marketplaces are harder because you got to move this stuff. And I actually want to see that as a competitive strength. And then ultimately, if it's an individual founder, I want to know that they have the ability to recruit really good talent around them. And if it's a team, just because I've been part of teams that are good and teams that are bad, I care a lot about interpersonal and the chemistry amongst the team. So I will say I recently turned 40. The biggest thing I realized outside of that worrying solves nothing is that chemistry solves most things. So, and when I say chemistry, you can replace it with the word like culture. It's to some degree the antithesis of the word strategy. Like I don't want to hear your strategy. I want to know why this is like why you guys trust each other.
Yeah, those are going to be super helpful. So definitely leading the questions here. And on that note, too, I know I promised founders we'd save some time here to do a group Q&A. So we'll just go ahead and jump into questions if that sounds good to you.
Yeah, I'm good with whatever.
Hey, Amantha, do you want to jump on?
Yeah, so I've been going through the marketplace school and I had a question about low touch versus high touch marketplaces and what would be the different approach from a founder's perspective and from an investor's perspective to both.
So I'm primarily a high touch guy. I think early on, this is why you need grinders who are willing to go and work the hours and put the time in, because I think the only way you can get away with low touch is if you are certain that you can build as strong of a relationship on it. Now, I don't want to confuse low and high touch with I got lazy people and they don't want to do anything, right? When I think of high touch, I think of it as in-person involvement. I think of it as you look at your customer acquisition costs and you expect there to be, let's just say months of development around that, and it's much less of a volume game. I think it's just always tricky to get, like, no matter how big the lifetime value of a customer is, you got to get somebody to say yes. And then you got to get them to keep saying yes. Right. So I think of it very much as this like engagement period early on where you want to keep working with them. So like for me, I really stay away from low touch, high volume, low LTV type situations because I just don't think that, I think that goes immediately and directly against all the things that make marketplaces great, which is building relationships, building a place where I don't need to have a relationship with you, Amantha. I just know because you're here, you're a good person. So I trust the relationship. I don't know if that answers your question or not. I guess I could have just said like, maybe that's one of the things I look for. Like, I want to know it's high touch. I want to know that there's personal relationships between the entity and the individuals. And I think you got to be very cognizant when you look at your lifetime value compared to like your acquisition or what I think of as your retention costs. I don't see customer retention costs enough when I talk to companies. Like, okay, what did it cost to get them to do it one time? It's entirely different than what's it cost to get them to be a raving fan. Or at least build this into their process. And so I think that there's different segments of investment for you to go from, I don't know who in the hell you are, to signing on and trying this once, from trying it once to building it into your workflow, to building in your workflow to the point where they become a champion. And so I think high touch is just how deep down that path you end up going, which they end up becoming the core, the whole 80-20, was it Pareto principle? I'm constantly just trying to just get more of the 20s and just like let the 80s die, which I think, I don't know. I'm not great at it with these, but I don't know if they'd answer your question or not, but
it does. And it really ties into what you said at the beginning about businesses. You're in the business with people and relationships. So the high touch makes a lot more sense.
Thanks, Samantha. So, hey, Miles, do you want to jump on? Saw you raise your hand there.
One thing that you mentioned is you love it when buyers can become sellers or sellers can become buyers. They can work either way. So My question is, what are the big challenges that you found when trying to convert a seller to a buyer? Yeah, what were the big challenges? How do you think about overcoming those? Did you kind of have to resell them? And how does that process kind of play out?
You have to naturally, if there is high involvement on the system and the person you're working with is not a complete nincompoop, they're going to be the one saying, can I? Hey, I can buy on this system. What do you think about letting me sell? Like, buyers always want to be able to sell, right? Like they just do, right? The demand wants to turn into the supply, because guess what? When a buyer goes to a seller, they're like, now I can get rid of the stuff that I bought from you that I don't need. And look, it depends on the market, right? Like I've been doing a lot of research into the scrap metal space, right? And those are very specific buyers and sellers. You would have to create an entirely different market for the buyers to become sellers, because now you're in a completely different segment of the chain of kind of how this material moves. In ACV, it was like, well, you buy car, like people was just like, I want a car. Or I say on the board of an amazing company, TCG Player, that was in the collectible trading card space. Chetty is the founder, is one of my best friends. He's a great guy. For them, it was like, think about it. I bought cards from you, and now I want to be able to sell them because I don't want them anymore. I want something else, and I need to create value. So I ultimately think when you get to the world where there are certain places where buyers and sellers can be both, and that's just where people bring product to the system to liquidate it. And then there's places where the product is actually marching down, I need to buy wheat because I am a baker and I need to make bread. Right? If I'm a baker selling wheat, there's something wrong, right? Because I'm not in the business of selling wheat. I'm in the business of selling bread. So it is tough. I let it be driven, like Amantha was just on, like she does, she has a marketplace for like expiring drugs. So you would go to somebody and be like, look at the amount you were able to generate off this. Do you think that, you would want to buy in the system also? And again, it all depends what people want, right? Like there are people who are happy to sell things that will never buy anything used or old or expired, right? Like whatever it is that implies the discount or the need for liquidity, they don't have that need. And I think it ultimately comes down to understanding drivers and to be able to point to the people that can be both. Look, I'm not saying go to a seller and make them a buyer, because that might be a much harder sale than just finding a random other company and making them a buyer. But be cognizant, aware, and through those relationships, you'll see who it's important. I guess I'm saying don't overlook those circumstances. And when I'm buyer and seller, there's no reason why I don't want other people on the system, because I need to interact with both. I become this pan-interested individual who's trying to bring both buyers and sellers on the system because I need to interact with both of them.
Yeah, buyer and seller overlaps always a great topic to chat through. So appreciate it. Cool. Hey, Dimitri, do you want to jump on?
My question is about experimentation, something I'm deeply passionate about. As I understand it, this is something that's a lot tougher in B2B businesses, maybe outside the used car dealers. Your sample size is really small. And you're not in the same situation like Facebook, right? Where you have millions of users, very easy to get feedback and clear signal. So how do you solve that in this setting?
Experimentation can happen a bunch of different ways. There's the mild single mutation, right? So like, for example, ACV, the auctions were 20 minutes each. I could run some auctions at 10 minutes. That's a mild mutation, right? Those, I think there are ways to like tweak with systems. The great thing about auctions compared to more of a classified or listed based marketplace is there's an event, it's happening, and then it's over. It's like a bar might run, Bikini Sunday and nobody showed up, so they don't do it again. But on Monday, it's done forever. You can't just change your website over to something else, right? So, I mean, again, I love auctions. I love them. I love B2B auctions. It's because when I was 6 years old, my dad used to give me all the cash and I would hide it in my jacket when we went to an antique show. And like, it's just been part of who I was my entire life. But I also think they're beautiful because auctions in and of themselves allow you to run these experiments so easy, because it's a controlled bell jar environment where something happens and it's over. For more of a classified based listing, you have to find a way, again, really knowing your customers. I would say it's really tough to do early on. And look, this is just part of the problem with marketplaces is you kind of got to get it right off the bat, like, you have to, the experimentation has to happen early on. And I like to think that it's non-technical experimentation. It's getting that group of 20 or 30 or 40 or whatever critical mass number of clients or, participants you need, and experimenting in thought with them on some of this stuff and finding controlled experiments to run early. So I think they're very, in summary, if I was more collected in my thoughts, experimentation is easy to do very early on. And it's also easy to do once you have a big enough populace that you can take, I could take a biopsy and run an experiment on it, right? Like that's what happens when you're looking if you have cancer. I've got this much liver and I'm taking this much of it. Well, when my liver is this big, I can't take that much of it. So it gets tough in the middle. And I think the important thing is early on while you're playing with it, for more than mild mutations, I guess you could A/B test. Again, we never really had to do that. At TCG, they A/B test a bunch. They would play with different things in different formats. But it's almost good to just get a populace and say, we are testing on you, right? We are the aliens. You are on our spaceship. It just looks like Earth, right? And let them know because, again, it's that feedback. And even in failure, you appreciate them enough to be part of that group. And if nothing else, you just take the dollars and put it into customer retention costs and say, well, at least they know that we gave it a shot. Here's a coupon to Amazon. Thanks for dealing with this bullshit with us, But it's tough, man. It really is. And maybe one of the ways to do it is to create more of an urgency-based model where things happen. Like, a lot of what we did in B2B marketplaces, you have to deal with when people work and they don't work on the weekends a lot. So maybe it's something that you do like on a weekend to, hey, look, we're going to try this one time on a Saturday. We're going to see how it goes. Or we're going to try this for a week. We know this is a dead time of the year, but you need to try it when your risk is the lowest. And you got to talk to a technical person on how you do that. But, it's definitely tough, man. It's definitely tough.
Awesome. We're going to try to squeeze in one last question here. Hey, Noah, you raised your hand earlier. Do you want to come on really quick?
Hey, Jack, this is kind of a personal question, but also, for other founders here as well. I'm currently in the last phases of raising my pre-seed. I have at the moment 15 to 20K remaining of my 250K round. But that 15K seems to be the hardest thing to raise. What do you recommend for founders that are trying to get that, last bit of money raised?
One, have a plan for not having it. That's your first plan, right? Look, I tell people you spend the first dollar before you spend the last dollar, right? So maybe what you do is you go to your current investors and say, this is what I plan to get done with the 250K. Pre-seed's tough because you're pre-revenue right now?
No, I have a bit of revenue. It's growing. It's at 500 MRR.
Go to somebody and have them make it a challenge. Hey, look, if I hit this, I don't need that last 25K or 30K for 6 months. I'm making something up. If in month 4 I'm here, would you give it to me? And they can say yes or no. Somebody's going to say yes, right? Now, I'm a sucker. I'm a salesperson at heart, and I love being sold. So, if somebody said that to me, I'll be like, yeah, I'll take that. Same valuation? Sure, I'll take it, right? You just need to find somebody that wants to deal with you because then you're done. You're not trying to optimize for getting 20K. You're trying to optimize for you not wasting 40 hours to get 20K. You might as well go get a consulting gig somewhere and make 20K and put it into the company yourself. But you just gotta be, I care about clever more than smart to some degree. And I think early on, founders need to be clever. They need to say, what am I really optimizing for? I'm optimizing my biggest resource, my only resource outside of my health is my time. So as long as I'm not doing anything that's going to kill me, I need to be able to get as much as my time. Those are your at-bats at being successful with the business. So you just be clever and literally write that down. Your goal shouldn't say raise 20,000. It says spend 0 cents on fundraising, right? That's the way I would think of something like that. So
cool. Thanks. Amazing.
Yes, that was a good last question. Thanks for sharing that too, Jack. Well, cool. So we're almost out of time here, but yeah, thanks for taking the time to join us here and sharing all your awesome experience. Not only on the operator side, but now investor side. So this is super helpful. I felt like we could go on for quite some time here. So, but I definitely want to be conscious of it. I actually had one last question for you before we wrap things up myself, and that's if you could go right back to before you started ACV Auctions, what would you tell yourself about B2B marketplaces more specifically?
What would I tell myself? I tell myself get some understanding of what the market value for your company was. I mean, when we closed our seed round or our pre-seed round, we were doing 24 million in GMV and we raised it at 3 million pre. Now, that's insane, right? Like today, I see Andrew on there salivating out of the corner of his mouth. He's like, I would put all the money in, right? But know your worth. And honestly, I'll tell you one thing I knew was happening that I struggled with. I did not have those 2 or 3 or 4 people that had been there before me and I trusted and were in my corner. I did it. We didn't have them. That's probably the biggest reason why I do what I do is because, and this, I would say this goes for, if Dan and Joe on this, they say the same thing. The advice we did get was just from people that had money, not from people that were successful, not the people that ever did marketplaces. And maybe not the best human beings on the planet, not the people we want to grow up to be. And so you just got to make sure everybody, you're not just the founder of your company, you're the president of your country and you need a cabinet. And look, I'm on the everything marketplace thing. I'm usually somewhat responsive. Believe it or not, I'm not that much of a tech guy. I like to be unplugged, but reach out. And I think if you are somebody that people ask for that kind of stuff, be honest right off the bat. This is post ACV when I started being an investor. I was like, I wanted to help everybody. And instead I should have just been like, no, I'm going to help 10 people and you're one of them. I'm letting you know that right now. And this is what the expectations are, so get that mentor-mentee relationship a little bit. And make sure it's with somebody that's not bogarting you, right? That's not bullshitting you. I think that's really important.
That's great parting advice. So we once again really appreciate it, and also to all you do to pay it forward and help founders and support them as well. So and then last but not least, time for a quick plug. So you mentioned you're not online all the time, but where can we follow along and keep up with you at?
Look, if everybody here knows you, and anybody that wants my email, you could feel free to give it to them out of this. I was running a newsletter that I'm going to restart called Buffalo Bridge, which is kind of a combination of my love of the community that I live in. And I'm not an original Buffaloian, but it is my home now. I like to bridge what's going on in Buffalo because I think it's just a community like any other to the rest of the world and people to it. There's 4,000 people on the list and it's like over 1,000 of them are founders. And we don't have over 1,000 founders in Buffalo, so they're from all over the globe. But I use that as a way to, every couple of weeks to stay in people's inbox and to also say afterwards, I think this is, we are all civilians. This is the civil thing to do, which is when you're not founding a company and building something, you go to tending to the earth so that other people can. And there's always cool resources and stuff on that, but I plan on restarting that in the next couple of weeks. But if you shoot me an email, I can help you with that. And I'm on the Everything Marketplace app. You can always reach out to me there too.
Awesome. We really appreciate it. Now I'll include links here for everyone. So, well, thanks again for joining us for the great group chat, and thanks everyone for the great questions today.